Chapter 11. October 18, 1880, the raw materials for the air brake system had finally arrived at the RD facility. Matthew, alongside the team of engineers assigned to assist him, gathered eagerly around the crates as they were unloaded. Metal cylinders, lengths of durable piping, high-tensile springs, and valves filled each box. The reality of his design was now within reach, ready to be shaped into something functional. Matthew clapped his hands together, drawing the team's attention. "All right, everyone. We've spent the past weeks familiarizing ourselves with the design and preparation, but now it's time to bring it to life." Tanner, still reserved, gave a curt nod, folding his arms as he eyed the materials. "I hope all this theory of yours holds up. We're dealing with materials and a system that haven't been tested in this configuration." "It'll hold," Matthew replied confidently, "but let's take it one step at a time. Starting with the compressor, we'll need to build it to withstand high pressure without any risk of rupture. Tanner, I need you to inspect the casting quality on the cylinders." Tanner's brow furrowed, but he gave a small nod, moving to examine the cylinders. The rest of the engineers dispersed to their designated tasks, following Matthew's instructions. The workshop filled with the clanging of metal, the hiss of welding torches, and the focused concentration of craftsmen absorbed in their work. As the compressor slowly took shape, Matthew moved between workstations, offering guidance and making adjustments. Each component, from the central piston to the intricate network of valves, needed precision. Even a slight miscalculation could jeopardize the system's efficiency and its safety. Several hours later, Tanner approached, his hands coated in metal dust. "The compressor's structural integrity checks out," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "Next?" Matthew straightened, meeting Tanner's gaze. "Next, we test it with the reservoir. I want to see if it can sustain the required pressure without fluctuation." Tanner raised an eyebrow. "And if it can't? Then we improve it until it does." The team wasted no time setting up the compressor with the reservoir tank. They secured the connections and carefully calibrated each joint to ensure the seals would hold under pressure. Matthew watched as the engineers tightened the last bolts, adjusting the valves to allow a controlled release of air. "Ready for their first test?" "All right, everyone," Matthew called out, drawing the attention of the team. "This is it. We're going to push the compressor to 70% capacity for this test. If it holds, we'll increase gradually. Let's keep a close watch on all gauges and be ready to release pressure at the first sign of fluctuation." He nodded to Tanner, who stood by the main valve. Tanner shot him a cautious look but gave a small nod before he turned the valve, slowly allowing air to fill the reservoir. The gauges climbed steadily, the quiet hum of machinery filling the room. The entire team watched in tense anticipation as the pressure readings rose, every eye fixed on the equipment. At 60%, a faint hiss escaped one of the seals on the reservoir. Tanner immediately gestured for a stop, and one of the engineers quickly closed the valve. "Just a loose bolt," Tanner muttered, grabbing a wrench and tightening the joint before stepping back. "Should be fine now." Matthew nodded, and they resumed, pushing the pressure higher. The readings climbed steadily. 65, then 70%. At 75, the gauge held steady, with no visible signs of strain on the system. A few of the engineers exchanged glances, some grinning, as relief washed over the room. Matthew allowed himself a slight smile, but his focus remained intense. "All right, let's push it to full capacity. I want to see this reservoir hold 100% pressure before we move on to integrating the brake cylinders." They adjusted the settings, and slowly, the gauge ticked upward. 80%, 90, the compressor hummed, the steel and valves holding steady as the pressure continued to climb. When it finally reached 100%, the team broke into applause, some engineers clapping Matthew on the back. Tanner approached, his usual frown softened slightly. "I'll admit, that's impressive. Now, let's see if it can keep up under repeated use." "Exactly," Matthew replied, his eyes glinting with determination. "The real test will be endurance. If this compressor can maintain consistent pressure for multiple cycles, then we're well on our way to making this air brake system a reality." With the first major hurdle behind them, the team set to work on integrating the brake cylinders, ready to test how the pressure would distribute evenly along the entire system. The team shifted gears, focusing on assembling the brake cylinders and connecting the intricate network of pipes that would run along the length of a train. Each cylinder, lined up on the worktable, would be tested individually before connecting to the full assembly. This phase was just as crucial as testing the compressor, as any inconsistency in pressure distribution could render the brakes unreliable. Matthew approached the first set of cylinders, inspecting each connection and seal with a keen eye. "Let's connect these cylinders to the main line," he instructed, signaling two engineers to assist with the alignment. "We'll run a preliminary pressure test at 50% capacity. If there's any loss, we'll locate and address it before scaling up." Tanner stood nearby, silently observing, his usual skepticism tempered by the previous test's success. "I'll monitor the gauge on the first cylinder," he offered, his voice steady. It was the first time Tanner volunteered. And Matthew appreciated the change in tone. They began the test, filling the main line gradually as each cylinder responded to the air pressure with a smooth, steady hiss. Tanner's eyes flicked to the gauge, his brow furrowing as he observed the gradual rise in pressure. Holding at 50%, he called out, glancing at Matthew, "Perfect. Let's give it a few more seconds and check for any fluctuations," Matthew replied, holding his breath along with the team as they watched the readings remain stable. Satisfied, Matthew instructed, "We'll move up to 75% on the next test, then integrate the remaining cylinders one by one." The second round went just as smoothly, with the pressure maintaining consistency across the cylinders. Tanner's initial doubts seemed to fade, replaced by a genuine sense of respect as he observed the design hold up under rigorous conditions. Once all cylinders were connected and the lines secured, Matthew called for a full capacity test of the entire system. "This is where we see the air brake mechanism in action," he said, signaling the team to brace for the final test. Tanner took his place beside Matthew, hands folded, eyes fixed on the gauge. "Here's hoping your theory holds, Matthew." Matthew smirked, undeterred. Only one way to find out. With a steady hand, he activated the system, watching as pressure built up along the line. The cylinders engaged, each one triggering the next in a cascading, synchronized movement. At 100%, the gauges held steady. And a ripple of pride and satisfaction passed through the team. The brake system had not only held up, it had surpassed their expectations. Engineers clapped each other on the back, and a few shook hands, knowing they had just contributed to a potentially groundbreaking advancement in railway safety. Tanner let out a long exhale, then turned to Matthew. "Well, I suppose you've proven yourself, Matthew. It's not every day a young upstart turns theory into a working reality." Matthew offered a firm nod. "It took a team to bring this to life, Mr. Tanner, but we're not done yet. We need to test it on an actual train." Tanner cracked a rare smile. "One step at a time, Matthew, but I'd say you've earned your place here." Chapter 12. October 20th, 1880. The cool autumn air was crisp, with a hint of moisture that clung to the early morning mist blanketing the rail yard. The steam locomotive stood ready on a section of track, its polished metal glinting under the pale sunlight. The train was prepared for its maiden test with the newly integrated air brake system, a moment that would determine whether their efforts would pay off. A makeshift stage had been erected beside the locomotive, adorned with a banner that read, "Revolutionizing Railway Safety." The air brake demonstration. Rows of chairs had been arranged in front of the stage for the investors and other distinguished guests. Among them sat prominent figures, including Charles Fitzwilliam, the wealthiest industrialist in the Great Republic. Matthew stood off to the side, hands clasped tightly behind his back as he watched Mr. Hargrave shake hands with the guests. Hargrave's voice boomed with cordiality as he introduced key members of the engineering team and spoke of the day's significance. The investors nodded as he introduced them. "Gentlemen, if I may have your attention," Hargrave said, turning to the audience with a flourish. "Today we are gathered to witness a new chapter in railway technology, but before we proceed with the demonstration, allow me to introduce the mind behind this ambitious project, Mr. Matthew Hesh." Matthew stepped forward, taking a deep breath to steady himself as he climbed onto the stage. The faces of the assembled crowd glistened with interest, including the unflinching gaze of Charles Fitzwilliam, whose presence alone raised the stakes. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrave," Matthew began. "Distinguished guests, for too long, railway travel has relied on manual systems prone to error, delays, and, most concerning, accidents, but today we take a step toward changing that reality." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Matthew could see some investors leaning forward in their seats, intrigued. "That boy looked young," Fitzwilliam commented. "That's what I thought about him in the first place, but when you speak to him, it sounded like he had a decade of experience." Hargrave replied in a whisper, "The air brake system you are about to see in action is designed to synchronize the braking of every car in a train simultaneously. This means no more inconsistent application. No more dangerous lags that put passengers and cargo at risk. This system will not only improve efficiency but will set a new standard for safety across the industry." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Fitzwilliam's brow arched slightly, a subtle signal that he was paying close attention. "Imagine a train hurtling along the tracks at full speed, its engineer needing to stop on a dime with manual brakes. It's a gamble. With this system, it's a guarantee. This is not just an advancement, it is a necessity for an industry poised for growth and greater speeds. Safety must evolve alongside ambition." A few nods and a smattering of applause came from the crowd, but the true test lay ahead. Matthew gestured to the locomotive behind him. Now, we will demonstrate what theory and dedication have brought us. I invite you all to witness the power of synchronized automated braking. With a nod to the engineers positioned by the train, the locomotive's whistle shrieked and a hiss of steam billowed out as the engine moved forward. It picked up speed, chugging along the track until it reached the designated point for the brake test. The crowd hushed as the engineer in the cab activated the air brake system. The entire assembly watched with bated breath as the brakes engaged. The hiss of released air swept through the system, and almost as if the train itself responded to a silent command, it slowed smoothly and halted within seconds. A stunned silence gripped the audience, quickly replaced by a wave of gasps and applause. Investors exchanged looks of astonishment and approval, while Fitzwilliam's lips curled into a faint smile. Amazing, there was no brakeman on top, and yet it stopped, one of the investors remarked, his eyes wide with disbelief. Everyone, Matthew called their attention once more. I present to you the air brake system. Matthew concluded his demonstration with a flourished gesture, stepping down from the stage to the sound of more applause. The engineers behind him exchanged proud nods and smiles, knowing they had just witnessed a pivotal moment in railway history. He walked over to Mr. Hargrave, where he spoke. So, Mr. Hargrave, what do you think? It's beyond my expectations, Hargrave replied, a proud gleam in his eyes as he watched the crowd continue their excited conversations. You've done something remarkable here, Matthew. This is going to change the face of the railway industry, not just here, but everywhere. Before Matthew could respond, Charles Fitzwilliam approached with an entourage of sharply dressed men, each radiating a sense of wealth and influence. Fitzwilliam's eyes held a mix of curiosity and respect as he extended his hand to Matthew. Young man, you have a great mind, truly a gift to the Republic. Now, I'm sure of your invention, you'd want to get it across every railway company. Nope, the invention of the air brake is under my authority, Hargrave interjected smoothly, placing a firm hand on Matthew's shoulder. His tone was polished, but there was an unmistakable undertone of ownership. As the financier and head of this establishment, the air brake system is a product of Hargrave's railway company. Without our facilities, resources, and my vision to take risks, none of this would have been possible. Matthew remained silent, though a subtle tension tightened his jaw. He had anticipated this moment, knowing Hargrave would seize the spotlight and claim the invention as his own. It was a practical move on Hargrave's part. The man had, after all, funded every aspect of the project, but Matthew wasn't here to contest ownership. He had a different plan. Mr. Hargrave is right. This facility and his support made the development of this system possible, Matthew said, taking a moment to acknowledge Hargrave with a slight nod. And now, as this invention enters the market, I only ask for one thing: compensation for my work. I am willing to sell the design, technical know-how, and rights to the air brake system for an agreed-upon sum. It will be yours to implement, expand, and profit from. Ho! Fitzwilliam mused as he noticed Matthew having this vibe of a businessman. How much are you asking for? Hargrave asked. Matthew met Hargrave's gaze with unwavering confidence. 50,000 florin. The eyes of the investors widened in surprise, while Hargrave's expression shifted from pride to slight apprehension. Fitzwilliam's brow arched higher, a look of appraisal settling on his face. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight behind the sum. That's quite a figure, young man, Fitzwilliam said, a slight smirk playing on his lips, but considering what we've just witnessed, I dare say it's justified. Hargrave's jaw tightened as he processed the situation. He glanced at Matthew, realizing that this young engineer had just maneuvered himself into a position of power, even under Hargrave's roof, but the glint in Fitzwilliam's eyes suggested he was intrigued. And that was not an opportunity to be missed. It is a steep price, Hargrave interjected, his tone measured, but if Mr. Fitzwilliam and others here are willing to back this endeavor, it could very well be the most profitable investment of the decade. Fitzwilliam looked around at the other investors who were nodding and whispering among themselves. Well, Hargrave, I'm not one to shy away from a good opportunity, he said. 50,000 florin is an investment worth considering for a system that could revolutionize the railway industry across continents and even other countries. Hargrave straightened, a faint smile returning to his face as he extended a hand to Matthew. It seems we have an agreement to discuss, Matthew. Chapter 13. At Hargrave's office, the warm glow of the oil lamp cast long shadows across the dark mahogany desk. Mr. Hargrave sat behind it, leaning back in his chair with an air of authority. A folder rested on the desk, its edges crisp and fresh, bearing the neatly handwritten contract prepared by his assistant. So, Hargrave began, folding his hands over his stomach and regarding Matthew with a practiced smile. I had my personal assistant draw up the contract that you and I are going to sign regarding the sale of the air brake system. This document outlines your willingness to transfer all design rights, technical know-how, and related materials to Hargrave Railway Company. Hargrave slid the folder across the desk, the paper rustling slightly as it reached Matthew's side. Read it over, take your time, he said, though the impatience lurking in his tone suggested he expected a prompt signature. Matthew opened the folder, scanning the meticulously written clauses. Every detail was laid out: the transfer of intellectual property, the guarantee of payment upon signing, and the rights Hargrave would hold to modify and distribute the technology. It was all as he expected, and more importantly, the sum of 50,000 florin was clearly stated. Everything looks in order, Matthew said, meeting Hargrave's gaze once more. This is a fair representation of our agreement. Hargrave's smile widened. Excellent. You've proven yourself, Matthew, not only as an engineer but as someone who understands the value of innovation. Few at your age would negotiate with such clarity. Matthew allowed himself a small smile as he picked up the pen. I'm going to sign this now. When he finished, he set the pen down and slid the folder back across the desk to Hargrave, who took it with barely concealed satisfaction. Hargrave's eyes gleamed as he glanced over the signature, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Well done, Matthew. Now, here's your check. Hargrave handed him a check of 50,000 florin. Matthew grabbed it from Hargrave's hand and then stared at it momentarily. Thank you, Mr. Hargrave, he said, tucking the check carefully into the inner pocket of his coat. He hesitated for a moment before clearing his throat. I do have a question, though. This is a significant sum and I'm not familiar with the process. How do I go about cashing this? Hargrave leaned back in his chair, chuckling. Of course, dealing with such an amount can be daunting the first time around. You'll need to take this to a reputable bank. Given the sum, I'd recommend the Amsterdam Bank Trust. They're well equipped for large transactions and can guide you through the process of depositing or withdrawing the funds as you see fit. Thank you for the advice. I'll make arrangements with them. Now, what are you going to do with that money? I am going to start my own company, Mr. Hargrave, Matthew announced. Ho? What kind of business is it? Hargrave asked. Well, it's related to transportation, but it won't be in the railway industry because that would be very unwise to do so, as there are already a lot of railway giants established in this country. I see. If not railway, then ships? Hargrave guessed. Matthew shook his head. It's not on the sea either. It's going to be on land. It seems to me that you are not willing to share with me your business idea. Are you scared that I might steal it? Hargrave finished, a teasing glint in his eyes. Matthew's smile was polite but guarded. Not at all, Mr. Hargrave. It's just that the concept is still in its infancy and I'd prefer to keep it close until I've had the chance to develop it further. You understand, don't you? The value of keeping certain cards close to your chest. Hargrave chuckled, nodding slowly. Ah, yes, the cautious inventor. I suppose I can't blame you for wanting to protect your ideas, especially after what you've accomplished here, but be warned, Matthew, once you step out as an independent, competition won't be as forgiving as I've been. I appreciate the advice, Matthew replied. His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable spark in his eyes. I'm prepared for whatever comes my way. Hargrave's smile faded slightly, a hint of calculation replacing his jovial demeanor. I guess I'll take this as your resignation. Matthew nodded, a sense of finality settling over him. That's right, Mr. Hargrave. I'm grateful for the opportunity you've given me, but it's time for me to forge my own path. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. You've always had that restless spirit about you, but know this, Matthew, when you step out on your own, you're no longer under my protection. I understand, Matthew replied, his expression unwavering. I'm ready for it. A moment of silence passed before Hargrave rose from his chair, extending a hand across the desk. Then I wish you the best, even if I don't entirely mean it, he said with a wry grin. Matthew took his hand and shook it firmly. Thank you, Mr. Hargrave. With the check secured in his pocket, Matthew turned and walked out of the office. He has money now, and all I have to do is to start the revolution of transportation he envisioned. But first, he needs to go to the bank to cash out the check and secure the funds needed for his ambitious plans. The walk to Amsterdam Bank Trust was brisk, with Matthew weaving through the busy streets filled with the clatter of horses' hooves and the rhythmic creak of wooden wheels. The imposing stone facade of the bank loomed ahead. It's tall. About 4 stories tall. Matthew stepped inside, greeted by the faint smell of ink and paper mixed with polished wood and leather. The interior was bustling with clerks shuffling between desks, customers discussing transactions, and the occasional clink of coin being counted at a teller's counter. A large, ornate chandelier cast a warm glow over the spacious hall. Approaching the nearest clerk, Matthew cleared his throat. Good morning. I'm here to cash a check. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a meticulously groomed mustache and round spectacles, glanced up and nodded. "Of course, sir, please follow me to one of our private counters." Matthew followed the clerk to a polished desk where another bank employee sat, ledger open and pen poised. He handed over the check, careful not to crease it. The employee's eyes widened slightly as he read the amount, a brief pause betraying his surprise before he composed himself. 50,000 florin? The clerk muttered, adjusting his glasses and exchanging a quick glance with his colleague. "A significant sum, indeed. May I see your identification, sir?" Matthew produced a small card with his name and the seal of Hargraves Railway Company, which had served as his professional credential until now. The clerk examined it, nodding with approval before standing up and motioning to another banker behind a locked door. "We will need a moment to verify this check. Sir, please bear with us." The clerk said. Matthew waited, watching as the clerk conferred quietly with another senior-looking banker. Their serious expressions gradually shifted as they nodded, seemingly satisfied. The senior banker approached Matthew with a polite smile. "Mr. Hesh, your check has been verified, and we will proceed with cashing it. How would you like to receive the funds? Would you prefer a portion in cash or a full deposit to an account with us?" Matthew hesitated for a moment, considering his response. "I'd like to open an account here and have the full amount deposited. I plan to make several large purchases soon." "Very well," the banker said, gesturing for a clerk to bring the necessary paperwork. "Please complete this form, and we will set up your account immediately." Matthew signed the required documents, and within moments, he had an official account with the Amsterdam Bank Trust, the significant sum of 50,000 florins securely deposited. Chapter 14. October 25, 1880. The rhythmic chug of the train filled the carriage as Matthew settled into his seat, the countryside of Amsterdam gradually blurring into fields and clusters of trees. The landscape was dotted with windmills and farmhouses, each passing moment bringing him closer to Sylvania, where his ambitious plans would take shape. The train whistle blared, jolting him from his reverie as the town of Sylvania came into view. Its sprawling industrial sector stood out, with smoke rising from the chimneys of various factories. As the train slowed to a halt at the bustling platform, Matthew disembarked and took a moment to absorb the sights and sounds of Sylvania. Merchants shouted their wares, factory whistles signaled the end of shifts, and workers moved purposefully, their faces lined with the grit of a day's labor, determined to find the right place for his venture. Matthew set off toward the industrial district. The streets were lined with imposing brick buildings. He scrutinized each one, noting the size, condition, and activity level, mentally cataloging their potential. After hours of walking and speaking with foremen and building managers, Matthew came upon an expansive factory at the edge of the district. Unlike the others, this one was quiet, its doors shut and its chimney dormant. A weathered sign read Hollis Engineering Works, faded from years of exposure to sun and rain. The structure itself was robust, its tall windows promising ample light and the interior space cavernous enough to house assembly lines and machinery. Matthew stepped inside, greeted by the echo of his footsteps across the empty concrete floor. The building was in surprisingly good condition, its iron beams sturdy, and the air devoid of the dampness that plagued older structures. He could almost picture the factory bustling with workers, the gleam of engines being assembled, and the hum of productivity filling the space. "Perfect," he murmured, a determined smile spreading across his face. He approached a desk near the entrance, where old ledgers and abandoned tools lay scattered. Glancing through the papers, he noted the factory had been closed due to mismanagement and debts that had left it vacant for years, a potential boon for an investor willing to breathe new life into it. "So, what do you think?" asked a voice from behind. Matthew turned to see a man in a well-worn suit and a bowler hat standing in the doorway. "It's impressive," Matthew replied, "but I need to know how much it would cost to rent this place." The agent stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. He glanced around, taking in the vast expanse of the factory floor and the high ceilings. "This facility hasn't seen use in years. As you might have gathered, the owners are eager to see it occupied again." "And the cost?" Matthew prompted, crossing his arms as he awaited the answer. The agent rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Given its current state and the fact that the owners want it off their books, I'd say we could start at 600 florin a month. But," he added with a shrewd glint in his eye, There is room for negotiation if you're considering long-term leasing or purchasing outright. Is the property available for purchase? Matthew asked. The agent's brows lifted slightly, clearly intrigued by the question. It is for ownership. The current asking price is 20,000 florin. But I believe I could persuade the owners to bring it down to 15,000 if you're prepared to make an offer quickly. Matthew knew that this was just a negotiation tactic by the agent. He believed that this factory cost about 15,000 florin, not 20, to make him think that he actually saved some money. I'm willing to offer 12,000 florin, he said, his voice firm as he met the agent's eyes. The room was silent for a moment as the agent absorbed the offer. A hint of tension creeping into the space, the agent's lips thinned into a tight line as he shook his head slowly. I'm afraid the owners would not entertain an offer that low, sir. However, I can speak to them about 14,500 florin. That is as far as I believe they would go. 13,000, he stated, watching the agent's expression shift. The agent let out a small sigh and nodded, extending his hand with a smile. Deal 13,000 florin it is. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Hesh. Matthew shook the agent's hand firmly. I intend to. A day later, October 26, 1880, Matthew met with the agent once more, this time with a contract in hand, neatly bound with the agent's company seal. Here we are, the agent said, tapping the contract lightly. This document outlines the terms of the purchase and details regarding the property itself. Matthew nodded, taking a seat as he opened the contract. The first few pages laid out the terms of payment, transfer of ownership, and a timeline for finalizing the transaction. He flipped through the pages methodically until he found the specifications for the factory. Factory specifications. Read the section header in bold script. Below it, the details were meticulously documented. Total area, 5,000 square meters. Height, 12 meters at the central ceiling arch, tapering to 10 meters at the sides. Width, 60 meters. Length, 83 meters. Structural support, reinforced iron beams. Windows, tall, arched windows allowing ample natural light. Flooring, solid concrete, capable of supporting heavy machinery. Additional features, 3 adjoining office rooms, a storage annex, and a small foundry area at the rear. Matthew traced his finger over the specs, envisioning the assembly lines, workstations, and machinery that would soon fill the space. Everything seems in order, Matthew said, closing the contract and looking up at the agent, who had been watching him with a keen I smiled. Good, if you're satisfied, we can proceed with signing and the transfer of ownership. He slid a pen across the table. Matthew picked up the pen and signed the contract. Congratulations, Mr. Hesh, the agent said, shaking his hand once more. You now own Hollis Engineering Works. May it bring you great success. Thank you, Matthew replied, a confident glint in his eyes. It will. October 30th, 1880, Matthew watched as he hired teams from a local cleaning company set to work inside the factory. The air was filled with the sound of shuffling feet, the clatter of metal tools, and the scrape of old debris being cleared away. Workers, clad in simple overalls and caps, moved methodically through the space, discarding rusted tools, broken wooden crates, and stacks of outdated ledgers that had accumulated dust over the years. Make sure to clear out everything that's unsalvageable, Matthew instructed one of the supervisors, a stout man with a bristly mustache and sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The supervisor nodded, shouting orders to the crew as they piled items into large wheeled carts to be hauled away. Matthew paced the length of the factory, taking mental notes of how much open space was being reclaimed. The floor, once cluttered with remnants of the factory's old life, was gradually revealing itself, a vast expanse of solid concrete ready to house the future he envisioned. He stopped by one of the workers who was sweeping near the foundry area. Be careful with that section, Matthew said, pointing to an old iron casting mold that looked salvageable. We might be able to repurpose some of these. The worker nodded, shifting his attention to moving the mold carefully to a corner for later inspection. As the day wore on, the factory began to look less like a forgotten relic and more like a space full of potential. Piles of debris were carried out, leaving a cleaner, clearer view of the building's impressive structure. The iron beams overhead cast crisscrossing shadows on the floor, sturdy and steadfast as they held the building aloft. With all of that settled, Matthew unfurled the blueprint carefully across an old workbench that had been cleared of dust and debris. The large sheet of paper crinkled as it spread open, revealing intricate sketches and detailed notes in precise handwriting. It was a blueprint for the first prototype of his automobile. The design of his future automobile would be similar to the 1930s because people in this era, especially the rich ones, loved aesthetics on everything they own. And he is going to give them the taste of transportation luxury. Chapter 15. How do you create an automobile in a world that is similar to the 1880s? The first important recipe is the knowledge about automobiles, like how does an automobile work, how is it structured, and what components made it come alive. Matthew understood that while most people in this era could barely fathom such an invention, he had the advantage of knowing precisely what was needed to make this concept a reality. He leaned over the large workbench in his newly purchased factory. Tracing the lines on the blueprint he had carefully sketched, the automobile's design would need to balance both innovation and practicality. The engine, an internal combustion type, was to be built compact yet powerful enough to drive the carriage smoothly over long distances. It would run on a refined version of petroleum, something that would require sourcing high-quality oil and establishing a process for refining it. Matthew's eyes shifted to a list he had scrawled on a separate piece of blueprints. Pistons, crankshaft, transmission gears, carburetor, spark plugs. Each part was critical, and he knew assembling them would be no simple feat. The challenge of creating precision-engineered components in an era not yet equipped for such complexities loomed large. He set down the pen and took a deep breath, imagining the final product. Sleek lines reminiscent of 1930s luxury cars, a polished body frame that would evoke admiration, and seats upholstered in fine leather. This vehicle wouldn't just be functional, it would be a symbol of sophistication. Now how are each part: engine block, pistons, crankshaft, transmission gears, carburetor, spark plugs, chassis and frame, wheels and axles, brakes manufactured? The engine block, the heart of the automobile, would start with casting iron or steel first. He needed to melt the metal in the foundry until it reached the appropriate temperature over 1,500 degrees Celsius for iron. Once molten, the metal would be poured into sand molds carefully crafted to the blueprint specifications. The mold would cool and solidify, forming the basic shape of the engine block. This cast piece would then need to be refined through machining, using lathes and drill presses to smooth surfaces, drill cylinders, and create channels for oil and coolant. Pistons required a similar process, but with more precision. Smaller molds would be created for casting the pistons, ensuring they were lightweight yet durable. After cooling, these parts would be machined to achieve the smooth, cylindrical surface necessary for fitting snugly within the engine block cylinders. The challenge would be maintaining exact tolerances to avoid performance issues, which meant employing skilled machinists. The crankshaft, the component that converted the piston's linear motion into rotational energy, was a complex piece requiring both casting and forging. After the initial casting, the crankshaft would undergo a forging process to strengthen the metal by shaping it under extreme pressure. Following this, it would be carefully machined to create the precise curves and journal bearings needed for seamless movement. This process would be one of the most technically demanding due to the intricate balance required for smooth operation. For the gears that made up the transmission, casting would once again be the starting point. The cast blanks would then be cut using gear hobbing machines, rotating cutting tools that shaped the teeth on each gear. Proper alignment and spacing of these teeth were critical for transferring power efficiently from the engine to the wheels. After hobbing, the gears would need to be heat-treated to harden their surfaces, reducing wear over time. The carburetor, responsible for mixing air and fuel for combustion, required smaller and more intricate casting methods using brass or aluminum. These components would be machined with precision tools to create the small jets, throttle plates, and venturi needed for regulating airflow. Each tiny passage had to be crafted with exact detail to ensure consistent fuel delivery. Spark plugs were made from a combination of ceramic, metal, and insulating materials. The central electrode would be formed by machining a slender rod of steel or copper. A ceramic insulator would be shaped through a process of molding and firing in a kiln, followed by assembly with the metal body. The finished spark plug would need to withstand high temperatures and pressures without failure. The body frame and chassis would be constructed from steel beams, cut and welded into the base structure. Reinforced joints and cross members would add strength to the frame, ensuring it could support the engine, passengers, and additional components. The exterior body panels, shaped through sheet metal forming and then assembled onto the frame, would provide both structural integrity and an appealing aesthetic. Wheels would be forged from steel, with rubber tires molded to provide grip. Axles, turned on lathes to achieve the right diameter and length. would be heat-treated to withstand heavy loads. These components would then be fitted with bearings to ensure smooth rotation. For brakes, he considered the hydraulic brakes. It would involve a master cylinder, brake lines, and wheel cylinders that used fluid pressure to transmit force from the brake pedal to the brake shoes. For this, he would need to create a master cylinder from precision-machined cast iron or steel. This component would house a piston that would pressurize the brake fluid when the pedal was engaged. Now, assuming all those parts are made, how about the necessary fluids such as coolants, gear oil, engine oil, brake fluid, and the crucial fuel that would ignite the heart of the engine? He started with coolants, essential to maintain the engine's temperature. In an era where antifreeze was unheard of, Matthew decided on a mixture of distilled water combined with a touch of alcohol, a resource that could lower the freezing point and elevate the boiling point. He made a mental note to secure barrels of distilled alcohol from local suppliers and design a rudimentary yet effective radiator system composed of copper tubes to dissipate the engine's heat. Next, engine oil was needed to reduce friction between the moving parts. The thought of sourcing crude oil made his brow furrow, but in this era, the people here are already harvesting black gold, so this should be easy. Then the gear oil, it's thicker and more robust, and was vital for the transmission system. It had to withstand intense pressure and provide a barrier against the grinding metal teeth of gears. The process would require similar distillation but with adjustments in composition, including the addition of rudimentary sulfur compounds to enhance its resilience. Then came fuel, the lifeblood of the entire machine. Matthew envisioned distilled gasoline, obtained through refining crude oil into a clear, flammable liquid capable of sustaining combustion. The challenge would be the consistency of this fuel, ensuring it was clean and potent enough to keep the engine running without fouling the components. Last but not least was the brake fluid, an essential component for ensuring the reliability of the hydraulic braking system. Brake fluid had to be specially formulated to maintain pressure within the brake lines and resist both high temperatures and freezing conditions. In this era, where synthetic compounds were scarce, Matthew would rely on a blend of castor oil mixed with alcohol to create a functional hydraulic fluid. Matthew noted that obtaining castor oil would require negotiation with apothecaries or suppliers of medicinal compounds, while alcohol could be sourced from local distillers. He would also need to develop a method for ensuring the fluid's purity to prevent contamination that could affect the braking system's performance. With all these in mind, it's time for the hunt of the laborers and materials. Chapter 16. February 25, 1881. Winter had settled over Sylvania, covering the town in a thin blanket of snow. The streets were quiet, with only the crunch of footsteps or the distant call of a vendor breaking the silence. Out on the edge of town, Matthew's factory stood brightly lit against the gray sky. 4 months ago, the factory had been empty, but now it was a fully operating workshop inside. Workers moved with purpose along the assembly line. The air was filled with the sounds of clinking metal and the steady rhythm of machinery. Engine blocks, freshly cast, were being fitted with pistons. Gears were shaped and hardened, ready for the transmission system. Each workbench was covered with tools and parts, while blueprints pinned to the walls acted as guides for the workers. Matthew walked along the floor, checking on the work. One worker carefully lifted an engine block onto a bench, preparing it for assembly nearby. 2 others adjusted parts on a carburetor, testing to make sure each piece fit just right. "This one shouldn't be here," Matthew pointed, directing the attention of the 2 workers adjusting the carburetor. "The throttle plate needs a tighter fit to control airflow accurately. If it's loose, you'll get an uneven fuel mixture, and that can throw off the whole engine." The 2 workers nodded, carefully making the adjustments as Matthew continued his inspection. There were 20 workers in total, men he had personally hired from various foundries around Sylvania. Some were skilled machinists, others seasoned in metalwork, and a few had experience in assembly lines. Moving along the line, Matthew stopped as he noticed a wave of hand from one of his workers outside. "Mr. Hesh, a delivery." "I'll be there," Matthew said and walked outside the factory. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage sat with crates stacked high, each marked with shipping labels indicating their long journey from the Orient. The driver, bundled against the cold, hopped down and greeted Matthew, who extended a hand to shake. "Mr. Hesh, here's your delivery from the east. Rubber, as requested," the driver said, gesturing to the sturdy wooden crates. Matthew's eyes lit up with satisfaction. This was the material he'd been waiting for. Quality rubber. He quickly signed the delivery papers, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Thank you, we've been waiting for this shipment." The driver nodded, glad to be of service. Sir, good luck with your work here. With a tip of his hat, he climbed back onto the carriage, leaving the crates in Matthew's care. Turning to a few nearby workers, Matthew directed them to carefully bring the crates inside. Handle these carefully, he instructed. Tomorrow, we are going to assemble all of them in one piece. The following day, the workers gathered around as the final touches were applied to their project. After 3 months of painstaking effort, countless adjustments, inventing new machining electric motor tools that aid in the creation, and endless hours spent on each intricate detail, they had finally completed their first prototype. Before them stood an elegant automobile unlike anything the people of this town had seen. The car was grand in scale, with a powerful yet graceful design. Its long, sleek body was painted a deep forest green with black accents that highlighted its sweeping curves and sturdy frame. Chrome headlights sat proudly at the front, casting a gleam even in the dim light of the factory, and a polished grille added to its imposing presence. The vehicle's wheels, fitted with white-walled tires, were reinforced with finely detailed, spoked rims that added a touch of sophistication. Spare tires were mounted on each side of the vehicle, just behind the front wheels, giving it a rugged yet refined look. The fenders arched gracefully over the tires, adding to the car's streamlined appearance. The interior, though not yet upholstered with luxury materials, hinted at the comfort and elegance Matthew envisioned. The seats, crafted with care, would soon be finished in fine leather, providing both style and comfort for future passengers. Large, rectangular windows framed by sturdy metal gave the cabin an open feel, allowing ample light to pour in. Yup, basically a car from the 30s, Matthew muttered under his breath. Despite the technological limits, he managed to create a vehicle that has the look of a 1930s car. Now for the specs. At the heart of this automobile was a V8 internal combustion engine. An ambitious choice given the time period. The engine had a displacement of 6.0 liters, with each of the 8 cylinders capable of delivering power smoothly and evenly. This engine could generate approximately 120 horsepower. An impressive feat given the manufacturing limitations they were working with. Each cylinder was cast from iron and precisely machined to handle combustion pressure effectively. With the carburetor system in place, air and fuel were mixed accurately, allowing for efficient combustion. As for the transmission, the car was fitted with a 3-speed manual transmission, which allowed for basic yet effective gear shifts. The gears were precision-cut and hardened to withstand the power output of the engine. The transmission was designed with brass and steel components to improve durability, given that lubrication and wear could be problematic in extended use. This system ensured smooth power transfer from the engine to the drivetrain, making acceleration possible without jerking or stalling. For the suspension, Matthew had opted for a leaf spring suspension system, a design that was both simple and durable. This setup used semi-elliptical springs, which provided a reasonable balance between comfort and handling. The springs absorbed shocks from the road, which helped in maintaining stability and made the ride smoother. These springs were made from tempered steel, able to handle the weight of the vehicle and passengers without sagging over time. The braking system was a hydraulic setup. It included a master cylinder, brake lines, and wheel cylinders at each wheel. When the brake pedal was pressed, fluid was pushed through the lines, forcing the brake shoes to press against the drum, bringing the car to a halt. The chassis was constructed from heavy-duty steel beams, carefully welded and reinforced to support the vehicle's weight and ensure structural integrity. Cross members were added to provide additional strength, allowing the frame to bear the load of the engine, transmission, and passengers. The frame's rigidity also contributed to the overall stability of the car, making it safer and easier to control. The wheels were made of steel with spoked rims, each fitted with a white-walled rubber tire imported from the Orient. The tires were constructed with multiple layers of rubber to withstand wear and provide grip on the road, an essential feature given the uneven road surfaces of the era. The axles, turned on lathes for precision, were heat-treated for durability and fitted with bearings to allow for smooth, reliable rotation. Though basic, the car had a rudimentary electrical system. It included a starter motor powered by a battery, a dynamo to recharge it, and wiring for the headlights and ignition. The headlights were fitted with high-intensity bulbs, bright enough to illuminate the road ahead even on the darkest nights. To prevent the engine from overheating, Matthew had designed a simple yet effective radiator system. Copper tubes coiled inside a metal casing dissipated heat away from the engine, with a mixture of distilled water and alcohol serving as coolant. This design helped maintain optimal engine temperature even during long drives. The fuel was stored in a rear-mounted tank and delivered to the engine via a pump and carburetor. Last but not least, the dimensions. It is about 5.2 meters in length, 2 meters in width, and 1.8 meters in height. Its weight was approximately 2,000 kilograms. Now, how does it work? The lead of the workers, Ben asked. Well, I am going to demonstrate it to all of you now, as for I am sure that none of you really knows what we are making. Matthew grinned. Chapter 17. First we are going to need to load this thing up with fuel, Matthew said, and beckon the workers to carry the barrel that has a refined gasoline, which Matthew had been refining meticulously over the past few weeks. The barrel was wheeled over to the car, its contents sloshing faintly as the workers steadied it near the vehicle's rear end. Matthew took a funnel and inserted it into the fuel tank opening, then carefully poured the gasoline, watching as the liquid flowed smoothly. This, he began, gesturing to the fuel, is what gives life to the engine. When it ignites, it causes controlled explosions within each cylinder, pushing the pistons down and generating power. As he finished pouring, he capped the tank, securing it tightly. He moved to the driver's seat, placing his hand on the ignition lever. Now, let's bring this machine to life. With a slight push, he engaged the starter motor, allowing the dynamo to provide an initial spark. The engine sputtered for a moment, a rough growl that soon settled into a smooth, rhythmic hum as the V8 came to life. Matthew revved the engine lightly, and the entire automobile seemed to pulse in response. Okay, the panels and gauges are working perfectly fine, Matthew said, gesturing to the dashboard in front of him. The simple setup included a speedometer, a fuel gauge, tachometer, and an oil pressure gauge, all carefully calibrated. Let's take her out for a test run, Matthew announced, his voice brimming with confidence. Now, who would want to ride in a journey with me towards the future? Ben and almost all of them raised their hands. Matthew chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head. He is having a hard time choosing who is who. Well, Ben, you come to the front while you and you at the back, Matthew said, pointing to 3 eager workers who had their hands raised the highest. They quickly climbed into the vehicle, wide-eyed and grinning with excitement. Ben settled into the front passenger seat, his hand gripping the door, still looking slightly skeptical. As they got situated, Ben looked at Matthew, raising an eyebrow. So, how does this thing move without a horse or ox pulling it? He asked, clearly fascinated but puzzled. Matthew smiled, eager to reveal the answer. Watch and learn. He pressed down on the clutch pedal with his left foot, shifting the gear into first, then eased his foot onto the gas pedal. The engine roared slightly as the car jerked forward, then smoothed out as Matthew controlled the throttle. The workers in the back let out surprised gasps as they felt the car move under its own power. Ben's eyes widened as he clutched his seat tightly, feeling the sensation of forward motion without any animal leading the way. Then they got out of the factory, trailed by the workers behind, and suddenly people walking along the road, shopkeepers, and even children playing in the snow stopped dead in their tracks, their mouths agape as they watched the massive, gleaming machine move without any horses pulling it. The rumble of the engine reverberated through the air unlike any sound they'd ever heard. It was deep, steady, and powerful, a controlled growl that seemed to command respect. Some townsfolk stepped back, wary of the strange contraption, while others leaned forward, eyes squinting in disbelief, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Ben glanced over at Matthew, still in awe despite being inside the vehicle. They look like they're seeing a ghost, he murmured, barely able to suppress his own amazement. Matthew chuckled, keeping his eyes on the road as he expertly maneuvered the car around a turn. This is the future, Ben. They're looking at the dawn of a new era. He shifted gears, the engine responding smoothly as the car picked up speed. It's fast. It's faster than the horses or the trains, Matthew said with a grin as they were enjoying the ride. A horse-drawn carriage suddenly crossed an intersection ahead of them. The driver of the carriage, startled by the sound and sight of the approaching vehicle, froze mid-turn, his eyes wide with shock. The horse reared up, spooked by the mechanical beast, and the driver tugged at the reins, struggling to calm it. Matthew's hands moved quickly, and instinctively he pressed down on the brake pedal, and the hydraulic brakes engaged smoothly, slowing the car to a stop just a few feet away from the carriage. The workers in the car braced themselves, amazed by the vehicle's ability to halt so effectively without the screech of metal or the rough jerk they had expected. The driver of the carriage regained his composure, though he continued to stare, bewildered. What the heck is that? The driver of the carriage exclaimed. Matthew breathed a sigh of relief. He thought he was going to crash the vehicle they painstakingly made for the last 4 months, not to mention. The carriage in front of them looked expensive as it was very ornate and decorated with intricate carvings and polished brass accents. The driver himself seemed to be dressed better than most, suggesting he was employed by someone of status in town. Ben, still wide-eyed from the close call, looked over at Matthew and whispered, "Careful there, boss, we don't want to make our first impression with this thing by running over a rich man's carriage." Matthew nodded, a slight smirk on his face. That would be one way to get their attention, but not exactly what I had in mind. He exited the vehicle, still the attention was around them, and spoke. "I'm sorry, didn't see you coming." "What is that?" the coachman asked again. "It's an automobile, an invention of mine. I am taking it on a test drive," Matthew answered. "It moved without horses." "Yes, it moved without horses," Matthew repeated as he smiled politely to the coachman. "Amazing," the coachman said in awe. "Well, I guess that we have to move now. We are building traffic," Matthew said with a chuckle. Gesturing toward the growing crowd that had gathered to gawk at the strange vehicle, townsfolk surrounded the automobile, some daring to reach out and touch the polished metal, others whispering in hushed tones about the mechanical horse. Matthew climbed back into the driver's seat, glancing over at his passengers. "Ready to keep going?" he asked with a grin. The workers in the back, who had been holding their breath through the encounter, finally exhaled and nodded as Matthew eased the car back into motion. The engine rumbled to life again, and the crowd parted, allowing him to maneuver down the main road. People continued to follow, some jogging alongside to keep up, others waving in astonishment. Children pointed with wide eyes and elders shook their heads, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Meanwhile, inside the carriage, someone was following the movement of the vehicle with their eyes. "Milady, that was an interesting piece of contraption there," said by a woman retainer who was dressed in a deep green dress with a fitted bodice and modest high collar. Her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. She sat beside a young woman whose attire, while elegant, was notably more luxurious. A velvet coat with silver buttons, a wide-brimmed hat adorned with an ornate feather, and gloves of fine leather. "Yes, it was indeed fascinating," replied the young lady as she tucked her hair behind her ear. "I should tell father about this discovery." Chapter 18. After an hour of test drive, Matthew returned to the factory and parked the car inside. He turned off the engine by pulling the ignition lever back, and the once thundering machine settled into a deep silence. A sense of accomplishment washed over Matthew as he sat there for a moment, letting the realization sink in. The workers, still buzzing with excitement, climbed out of the vehicle, exchanging wide-eyed glances and enthusiastic murmurs. "That was incredible," Ben finally said. "I didn't think it was possible for a machine to move like that." Matthew grinned, stepping out of the car and patting its hood. "Well, this is just the beginning," he said. "We've got a lot of fine-tuning to do, but I'd say she's ready for real production. But first, we are going to clean this beauty up." Over the course of the test drive, the vehicle accumulated dirt mixed with the remnants of horse traffic on the snowy streets, leaving splatters of mud and streaks of grime along its once pristine finish. Matthew led the workers to gather buckets of water, rags, and a few brushes he had around the factory. "Let's give her the care she deserves," he said, rolling up his sleeves. The workers, still riding high from the excitement of the test drive, eagerly joined in, scrubbing down the metal body, carefully wiping away the grime from the wheels, and polishing the chrome accents. The car's deep forest green paint began to shine again, reflecting the factory lights as they meticulously restored it to its former gleam. As they worked, the men couldn't help but exchange stories about the people they'd seen watching the car pass by, their stunned expressions and amazed gasps. "Did you see old Mr. Peterson's face?" one of the workers chuckled. "I swear, he nearly fell over when he saw us drive by without a horse." Even the carriage drivers were wide-eyed, Ben added with a laugh. "They didn't know what to make of it." Matthew joined in the laughter. "It's only a matter of time before everyone in town gets used to seeing this, and soon, they'll be asking for one of their own. After all, this one doesn't poop." The workers burst into laughter, slapping each other on the back as they continued wiping down the car's polished surfaces. It was a small joke, but it captured the spirit of what they had just achieved: a machine that broke the norms of everyday life, one that was self-contained, powerful, and most importantly, clean. As the laughter faded, Matthew took a step back, hands on his hips, and surveyed the gleaming car with pride. We are going to make a lot of these for sure, but to do so we are going to need a copious amount of money. In that case, why don't you approach a robber baron? Ben suggested. Robber baron? Matthew furrowed. What is that? Ben was slightly shocked when he heard that from Matthew. You don't know? Robber barons are wealthy industrialists who control entire industries. Some say they're ruthless, but if it's money you need to start mass production, those are the kinds of people who can make it happen. Matthew hummed and thought, well, who should we approach? How about Fitzwilliam? He is the richest man in the country. He is a banker and has invested in nearly every major industry: railroads, steel, coal. If anyone has the means to fund a project like ours, it's him, Ben suggested. I am familiar with the man, Matthew said. Okay, where do we see him? I believe he has an estate not far away from here, Ben replied. I see. In that case, let's go meet him in 2 days, Matthew declared. 2 days later, in Matthew's factory, Matthew was working on a different model of automobile. There were schematics for trucks. Pickup trucks, sedan, SUV, cabriolet, coupe, and even motorcycles when Ben burst into the workshop, panting heavily, his face flushed with excitement and urgency. Mr. Hesh, you have to, there's a visitor, he managed between breaths. Matthew looked up from his work, raising an eyebrow. A visitor? Who is it, Ben? I don't know, but the carriage looked familiar. You'd know when you see it, Ben said urgently. Fine. Matthew set his pen down and walked over to the exit where he saw the carriage that Ben was referring to, and it was very familiar. It was the carriage that they almost ran into if he hadn't pressed the brake. As the coachman hopped down from the familiar carriage, he approached with a respectful nod and opened the door with a practiced flourish. From within, a figure in an elegant dress emerged, stepping gracefully onto the ground. The first to exit was a striking young woman dressed in a sophisticated yet understated black and white ensemble. Her attire was an exquisite blend of Gothic elegance and refinement. With lace trimmings and intricate embroidery on the bodice, her dark hair was styled neatly with a delicate black headpiece. Her eyes, bright and observant, scanned the surroundings with an air of quiet dignity as she stepped aside, folding her gloved hands in front of her with a practiced poise. Then, from the depths of the carriage, a second woman emerged, and her presence commanded immediate attention. Dressed in a rich, opulent gown with deep, vibrant tones that contrasted beautifully against the subtle, snowy backdrop, she radiated an aura of nobility. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders in loose waves, framing a face of refined beauty, her blue eyes clear and intense as they took in her surroundings. With a fur-lined coat draped elegantly over her shoulders and a glimmering pendant at her neck, Matthew was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect that there would be a fine specimen in this world. The coachman unfurled a rolled carpet from the carriage steps to the factory floor. The noblewoman acknowledged her coachman's effort with a slight, graceful nod before stepping forward onto the carpet. Each step she took was deliberate, embodying both confidence and refinement. Her gaze shifted from the surroundings to Matthew, her intense blue eyes locking onto him with an expression of curiosity and a hint of amusement, as though she were intrigued by what she had come to see. The young woman in black, her companion, followed closely, maintaining a respectful distance but keeping a watchful eye. She too took in the industrial environment, her expression one of quiet interest, though her posture remained perfectly poised. Matthew, feeling the weight of their presence, straightened up and gave a respectful nod. To whom do I owe the pleasure? Matthew politely asked. The noblewoman locked gaze with him and answered, I'm Amber Fitzwilliam. Fitzwilliam? Matthew repeated, so she is the daughter of Mr. Fitzwilliam. You were the one controlling that metallic beast 2 days ago, and I must say, I am intrigued in what I see. Is there a place in your factory where we could speak in private? Well, there is my office, Matthew replied, gesturing toward a door at the far end of the factory floor. He quickly waved over Ben, who was still watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, and instructed him, please prepare some refreshments and bring them to my office. Amber Fitzwilliam nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips as she glanced around the factory with genuine interest. Lead the way. Matthew led her and her companion through the workshop, the workers pausing momentarily to watch as the elegant visitors passed by. The stark contrast between the industrial, grease-stained surroundings and the finely dressed women felt surreal, and Matthew could feel the weight of the workers' curious stares. Amber, on the other hand, saw the metallic beast that she saw 2 days ago. It was there, clean and pristine. Is this the same one? She asked, turning to Matthew with a spark of excitement in her voice. Yes, that is what we drove 2 days ago, Matthew confirmed. Amber nodded, her gloved hand reaching out to lightly brush against the smooth surface of the vehicle's hood. Miss The office is here, Matthew called her over. Oh, pardon for my distraction, Amber said softly and followed Matthew inside the office. Once inside, Matthew motioned for Amber to take a seat. The office was simple. With a worn wooden desk covered in scattered blueprints and sketches of various mechanical parts, Amber's companion stood nearby, her gaze never straying far from Amber as though she were ready to intervene at a moment's notice. Now then, Miss Fitzwilliam, what is the purpose of your visit to our workshop? Matthew inquired. The purpose of my visit is simple, mister. May I know the name of the person who built that elegant machine? Matthew Hesh, he replied. Mr. Hesh, she repeated, a faint smile touching her lips. I see great potential in your machine, and I believe it could change the future of transportation. My family would like to offer assistance to help you bring it to the world. Would you be willing to accept my invitation to our estate? You could demonstrate your invention to my father. Matthew's eyes widened slightly. This was precisely the opportunity he had been seeking. Miss Fitzwilliam, I would be honored to present my automobile to your father. Amber inclined her head gracefully. Excellent. I shall make the necessary arrangements. Please be prepared to visit us tomorrow afternoon at this address. Her companion handed Matthew a card. Written on it was the address to their estate. I look forward to seeing you at the estate, Mr. Hesh. Until then. Chapter 19. Please, let me escort you to your carriage, Matthew offered, extending his arm in a gentlemanly manner. Amber Fitzwilliam smiled, a graceful nod acknowledging his gesture. She placed her gloved hand lightly on his arm. And together they walked out of the modest office, her companion following closely behind with a watchful gaze. As they stepped out onto the factory floor, the workers subtly paused in their tasks, casting curious glances toward the unusual sight of their employer walking arm in arm with a noblewoman. Looks like our boss finds his love, said one of the workers. What are you talking about? Another worker whispered back. That noblewoman's way out of his league. No offense to the boss, but she's from a different world. Maybe, the first worker replied, grinning, but you saw the way she looked at that machine. If anything, she's interested in his work, and who knows what might come of that? Matthew overheard the faint murmurs as they passed, and though he chose not to react, he couldn't help but feel a flush of warmth at the workers' speculations. After all, the woman that is walking beside him was just too stunning. Even compared to the modern standards, she has the looks, the body, and even her scent, a delicate, floral fragrance that seemed to linger in the air around her. Matthew found himself momentarily distracted by it, almost forgetting the purpose of their walk as he escorted her toward the carriage. Mr. Hesh, you can let go of me now, Amber said softly. Matthew blinked, realizing he had been so absorbed in the moment that he was still holding Amber's arm even though they'd reached her carriage. A faint blush crept up his cheeks, and he quickly released his hold, clearing his throat in an attempt to cover his embarrassment. My apologies, Miss Fitzwilliam, he said, offering a slight, awkward bow. I didn't mean to linger. Amber chuckled so cutely that it has a good melody on it. It's quite all right, Mr. Hesh, it is a pleasure meeting you. Matthew felt his blush deepen and used to such easy familiarity from someone so highborn. Thank you, Miss Fitzwilliam, he managed, his voice steadying. I'll see you tomorrow then. I look forward to the opportunity. Amber gave a small nod, her eyes warm. As do I, Mr. Hesh. Until then. With that, she climbed gracefully into her carriage, her companion settling beside her. The coachman closed the door, tipped his hat to Matthew, and took his place at the reins. With a gentle crack of the whip, the carriage began to pull away. Matthew watched it disappear down the road, a faint smile still lingering on his face. Boss Ben nudged him on the arm, a sly grin spreading across his face. Be careful now, that stare of yours might leave scorch marks on the road. Matthew snapped out of his reverie, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. Don't start, Ben, he muttered, trying to shake off the warmth that still lingered from his brief encounter with Amber Fitzwilliam. Ben chuckled. I mean, who can blame you? That woman is a top-tier noble, I must say. Now, boss, don't get your hopes up with their kind of woman. I am sure that they would only entertain the rich. Matthew shot Ben a look, a spark of defiance in his eyes. Money's easy to earn, Ben. It's the ideas and the work that count. If she's impressed by what I'm building here, then wealth won't be a problem. Ben raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his boss's confidence. I've never seen you so sure about someone before, let alone a lady of her class. So, does this mean you've got a bit of a crush on Miss Fitzwilliam? Matthew hesitated, but his smirk gave him away. Maybe there's something about her. Beyond just her elegance, she seems genuine, curious, and she understands the significance of what we're doing here. Ben chuckled. Well, here's hoping she keeps seeing you for who you are and not just the machine you're building. Anyway, tomorrow's the big day. Let's make sure everything's ready to blow them away. A day later, Matthew drove the automobile to Fitzwilliam Estate. The guards that were on duty were shocked to see it stopping in front of the gate. Matthew rolled down the windows and handed him the card that Amber's assistant gave to him the day before. The guard took the card, still staring at the vehicle in awe. "A car without horses, sir?" he murmured, trying to piece together what he was seeing. "Indeed," Matthew replied with a small smile. "Could you let Miss Fitzwilliam know that Matthew Hesh has arrived for the appointment?" The guard nodded, regaining his composure. "Yes, sir, right away." He handed the card back to Matthew and signaled to another guard, who quickly went inside to relay the message. As Matthew waited, he took in the grandeur of the Fitzwilliam estate, the towering wrought iron gates, the manicured gardens, and the sprawling mansion in the distance. All spoke to the wealth and status of Amber's family. He'd imagined success before, but standing here brought the reality of it closer. This was a world he had yet to fully understand, and yet he found himself more determined than ever to make his mark within it. Moments later, the gates began to open, and a well-dressed servant approached the car, gesturing for him to proceed up the long driveway. Matthew shifted gears, guiding the car along the gravel path. Finally, he reached the main entrance, where Amber awaited Matthew at the main entrance, looking as elegant as ever in a sophisticated ensemble. She wore a beautiful, pale yellow dress complete with intricate embroidery and delicate lace accents. The high collar and fitted bodice accentuated her refined silhouette, and she held a lace-trimmed parasol above her head. Her hair was styled immaculately, tucked beneath a small, elegant hat adorned with soft flowers which complemented her dress. As he brought the car to a halt and stepped out, Matthew felt his heart skip a beat. She looked every bit the picture of nobility. Yet there was a genuine warmth in her smile as she greeted him. "Mr. Hesh," she said, nodding politely. "It's a pleasure to see you again. I trust the journey was pleasant?" "Very much so, Miss Fitzwilliam," he replied, offering a respectful bow. "Your estate is truly breathtaking." Amber glanced around, as though seeing the estate through his eyes. "Thank you. I suppose one can get used to such surroundings, but I imagine your machine must be a rather unusual sight here." Matthew chuckled. "I imagine so, but that's exactly what I'm hoping to change." "So is that the machine that you were talking about, my dear?" A voice sounded deeply from behind, and the retainers parted as to give way to Mr. Fitzwilliam, who was scanning the automobile below him. "I never expected that I would see you again, Matthew," Mr. Fitzwilliam said. "Me too, Mr. Fitzwilliam. So that's what you built for 50,000 florins that Mr. Hargrave gave you, huh?" "That is correct," Matthew confirmed. "Interesting, very interesting. I want to see it in action." Chapter 20. "You can sit in the front, Mr. Fitzwilliam. And by the way," Matthew turned away from the automobile for a moment, his eyes sparkling with a hint of confidence. He ascended the stone steps where Amber stood, her elegant silhouette framed by the soft sunlight filtering through the grand entrance. As he reached the top, he offered a flourishing bow, extending his arm toward her with a charming smile. "Miss Fitzwilliam, I would like to invite you to join us for the ride. It would be my honor to have you experience the machine firsthand." Amber's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise dancing across her features. It was rare for someone to extend such an invitation to a lady of her standing, especially one involving something as bold and unconventional as a ride in an automobile. However, the curiosity in her gaze quickly softened into a delighted smile. "I must admit, Mr. Hesh, you do have a way of catching people off guard," Amber replied, her voice laced with amusement. "But I find your offer intriguing." She glanced over her shoulder, as if seeking silent approval from her ever-watchful companion, before stepping forward with a graceful nod. "Very well, I accept." As they approached the vehicle, Matthew swiftly opened the front passenger door for Mr. Fitzwilliam, who climbed in and settled onto the seat. Then, turning his attention to Amber, he moved to the rear door. Amber stood there, her delicate lace-trimmed parasol still raised to shield herself from the afternoon sun. Matthew gave a polite bow before opening the door, extending his hand to help her inside. "Allow me, Miss Fitzwilliam," he said, his tone warm yet respectful. Amber accepted his hand, her gloved fingers resting lightly in his palm as she gracefully stepped into the vehicle. The soft rustle of her gown against the leather seat filled the air, and she carefully arranged her skirts, ensuring they did not crease. As she settled in, she gave Matthew a smile that was both grateful and amused. "Thank you, Mr. Hesh," she said softly. Matthew couldn't help but smile in return, feeling a surge of pride. He closed the door gently behind her, with both passengers seated. Matthew walked around to the driver's side, climbed in, and took a moment to scan their faces. "So, what did you notice?" "It's crampy," Fitzwilliam noted. Matthew chuckled softly at Mr. Fitzwilliam's blunt assessment. "Yes, I admit, it's not as spacious as a carriage," he said, adjusting his grip on the steering wheel. "But what it lacks in space, it more than makes up for in speed and efficiency. Walk me through the process of operating this automobile." Fitzwilliam began without hesitation. "Very well, first thing first. The concept of the automobile, Mr. Fitzwilliam. I am sure that you are familiar with steam locomotives, or any other machines that operate on steam." Matthew leaned back slightly, his hands resting confidently on the steering wheel as he continued his explanation. Amber leaned forward in her seat, her eyes alight with curiosity. "I am familiar," Mr. Fitzwilliam answered. "Excellent," Matthew replied, his tone brightening as he continued. "Steam engines are powerful, but they are cumbersome, requiring large boilers, water, and coal. The automobile, however, operates on an internal combustion engine instead of relying on steam pressure. It ignites a mixture of air and fuel within a confined space, creating controlled explosions that drive the pistons." Mr. Fitzwilliam listened, his eyes narrowing as he digested the information. "And this combustion process, what fuel does it require?" Matthew turned the ignition lever, the engine coming to life with a deep rumble. "This model uses a form of refined petroleum, sir," he explained. "It's efficient, burns cleanly, and most importantly allows the engine to start almost instantly." Amber, seated in the back, leaned forward slightly, her parasol resting against her lap. "So it doesn't require hours to build up steam? It can start immediately, as we just witnessed?" "Precisely, Miss Fitzwilliam," Matthew confirmed, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "This is what makes it revolutionary. The moment you decide to go, you can simply turn the ignition, press the pedal, and you're off." Amber's eyes sparkled with excitement. "How remarkable. It's almost like freedom on wheels." Mr. Fitzwilliam's gaze softened as he observed his daughter's genuine enthusiasm. He nodded slowly, clearly intrigued despite his initial skepticism. "And how fast can this contraption go?" he asked. Matthew grinned, shifting gears with a confident flick of his wrist. "Let me show you, sir." With that, he pressed down on the accelerator. The automobile surged forward smoothly, the cobblestone road beneath them a blur. Amber let out a soft gasp, her gloved hands gripping the sides of her seat, while Mr. Fitzwilliam's eyes widened in astonishment. "This is quite impressive," Mr. Fitzwilliam admitted, raising his voice to be heard over the engine's steady hum. "But how reliable is it? Surely a machine like this is prone to breaking down." Matthew eased off the accelerator, bringing the car to a more comfortable speed. "That's a fair concern, sir," he acknowledged, "but I've designed it with durability in mind. The engine can run continuously for several hours. And I've ensured that the components are as sturdy as possible. Of course, there will always be improvements to make, but this is just the beginning." Amber, who had been quietly absorbing every word, leaned closer to the front. "So, Mr. Hesh," she asked, her voice carrying a note of playful challenge, "if this automobile is so reliable, would it fare well on rougher terrain?" Matthew turned slightly to meet her gaze, a confident smile tugging at his lips. "Why don't we find out, Miss Fitzwilliam?" he suggested, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Would you care for a detour?" Amber exchanged a glance with her father, who gave a slight nod of approval. "Very well," she agreed, her tone almost daring. "Let's see what your invention is truly capable of." Matthew's heart raced with exhilaration as he turned the wheel sharply, guiding the automobile off the main road and onto a narrow, less-traveled path that wound through the outskirts of the estate. The gravel crunched beneath the wheels, and the vehicle jostled lightly as they traversed the uneven ground. Mr. Fitzwilliam held onto the door handle, his earlier skepticism replaced with a growing sense of admiration. "This is quite the feat, young man," he conceded. "If you can navigate roads like these, then perhaps your automobile truly does have potential beyond just city streets." Amber's laughter filled the cabin, her eyes shining with delight. "I can hardly believe it," she exclaimed. "This is exhilarating. I never imagined I'd enjoy something like this so much." Matthew's heart swelled at her words. "I'm glad you're enjoying it, Miss Fitzwilliam," he replied warmly. As they reached a small clearing surrounded by trees, Matthew gradually brought the automobile to a stop. The engine purred softly as he turned to face his passengers. "So," he said, his eyes flicking between Mr. Fitzwilliam and Amber, "what do you think of my invention now?" Mr. Fitzwilliam was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, he turned to Matthew, a rare smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "I'll admit, you've exceeded my expectations," he said, I see potential here, young man, great potential, but I have one important question. What is it? Matthew inquired, curious on what the question might be. Is this invention of yours, patented?